Welcome to day 2 of Planet Possible at Flood & Coast. First session of the day is just finished, you can hear in the background. I'm Niki Roach, and here's what's coming up on the pod today. Got a brilliant pod coming up for you, 3 fantastic guests. So Emma Howard-Boyd's back with Julie Foley from the Environment Agency, and we've got Jyoti Banerjee, who's the co-founder of North Star Transition. It's actually my first day here at Flood & Coast, and it was really impressive walking into this ginormous exhibition hall this morning and just seeing the array of exhibitors and the diversity of the speakers that we've got on the programme. We kicked off this morning with Emma Howard-Boyd and Caroline Douglas and Lily Matson, and it was a fantastic session, really inspiring to hear Emma encouraging us to think about what's really possible in this decade of delivery. So coming up first, joining Al is Emma Howard-Boyd and Julie Foley.
So we're joined by Emma Howard-Boyd, Chair of the Environment Agency, and Julie Foley, who's Director of Flood Risk Strategy and National Adaptation. Welcome both, and thanks very much for your time. What are your reactions on the conference so far?
It's absolutely wonderful to be back here in Telford in person. The energy in the room is just extraordinary. And for me, it's about seeing some of the new innovations that have come to the fore since we last were able to gather in person at Flood & Coast. That's absolutely brilliant.
Emma, you made the point about the amount that's changed since 2019. Really, I wanted to ask Julie initially. Last time we were here in 2019, there was an awful lot of talk about the forthcoming FCERM strategy. Hadn't been published then. Now we've got the strategy, and we've now got the newly published roadmap out to 2026 as of yesterday. Is there anywhere that you think is a particularly challenging area to crack, a particularly knotty issue?
I would probably pick 2 areas, surface water.
Mm-hmm.
I still think we need quite a lot of policy reform when it comes to surface water. We know we've got some very strong planning policies, for example, on flood risk and development management, but we have less strong and clear policies when it comes to surface water flood risk, for instance. That's also an area where the skills and capabilities in local planning authorities, local authorities more generally, are less developed. Less is known about it. So I think that's an area that, given it's one of the fastest growing sources of risk, we really need to pay a lot more attention to. And then the other area I would pick out is the area that Sir James Bevan particularly focused on in his speech at Flood & Coast yesterday, which is around coastal adaptation. It's actually great that we've got so many coastal partners here at the conference and a number of breakout sessions talking about the coast. So we're certainly shining a spotlight on it through Flood & Coast, but we know the issues are incredibly challenging for some of our communities, but particularly where they're facing some very acute challenges from coastal erosion.
And there's a really strong climate element to both of those. And do you think that some of the tricky conversations that might need to be had around those, the urgency of where we are on climate at the moment makes it a little easier to have those conversations?
There's no doubt that we are all accelerating in the conversations that we're having, and I think moving away from seeing things in different pockets, merging them together, racing ahead, racing towards solutions is just something that we have to become more aware of. And the events that we are seeing around the world just show the scale of what we are confronting. And so we do need to have those harder conversations, which are about lives, livelihoods, and what we do about the severity of those issues. We need to bring them to the fore so that we're ready when we need to make those difficult decisions and take action, particularly when it comes to moving communities to better places.
This morning when you were talking, Emma, you set out some pretty stark realities. You were speaking of 8.2 billion global losses from flooding a year, our trajectory still being towards a 3.2 degree average warming, an international failure to develop a framework for adaptation on a similar level to that we have for decarbonisation. You said that climate change is still too often not part of the brief when it comes to kind of infrastructure development and wider development. How can we really land the message that we've got to adapt while we decarbonise?
There's no doubt that COP26 put adaptation clearly on the agenda. Having attended a few COPs in the past, adaptation was talked about on every single day. And importantly, in the context of what world leaders were talking about and what finance ministers were talking about. So getting out of just the limited world of environment. But there's still so much more we need to do. And sometimes I just talk very simply about what's the point of investing in all of this net zero activity, so whether it's energy efficiency, renewables, if they simply wash away in a flood or melt in a heat wave. I wish I had the answer, because there are more and more of us delivering these messages, but we're still not landing them in a way that people compute what needs to happen when this year alone we've had 3 named storms here in the UK, we've had heat waves in India, in Pakistan, we've had floods around the world, not just in the global south, in really, really developed urban environments. We've got the damages, the records of how much damages is coming from floods alone, and yet there is still parts of the financial system, the business system, the political system that is not registering that this is happening now at one point, whatever degrees we've reached, and we're not on track for 1.5 degrees, we're barely on track for just above 2 degrees, and therefore there are literally parts of the world that are becoming unlivable in right now. We have to land this message, and this is where we all have to work together to make sure that we are delivering those messages in a way that as many people who need to understand and can and should be revising their plans so that they're embedding not just net zero commitments in the way that they're developing things, but making sure that as much as possible the infrastructure that's being built, the houses that are being built are ready for the climate shocks that we know are locked in for many decades to come.
One of the other things that you said was that you recommended the Treasury undertake a climate adaptation equivalent of the Dasgupta review, an adaptation assessment at a national level. Is it that kind of exercise that you think could really flush out the really big economic impact numbers that might make organisations and entities step back and think, right, actually, yes, this is absolutely critical?
I'm calling for it because I think it is necessary. I'm hoping that the appetite for doing something about it is growing. What I wouldn't want to see happen if the Treasury were to announce something like this was to slow down, because every decision we make right now, every building we build, every infrastructure that we build needs to be ready for net zero, nature's recovery, climate resilience. But I think there's more that needs to be done to make sure that we're taking these things seriously. That's why I talk about the £650 billion worth of infrastructure that is already set out for this decade. All of that needs to be built through the lens of net zero, climate resilience, and nature's recovery, or it will do what I said earlier. It will be under threat of literally being washed away in a storm event or a rain event or melting in a heat wave.
And you've been a global commissioner for adaptation. We've obviously got international experience in the room here, vast amount of technical experience. From a technological point of view, not a hearts and minds and politics point of view, do you think we've got this as adaptation is concerned? There's no technological reasons why we can't do this. This is just about getting the momentum behind investment and delivery.
We know so much already. We still need to innovate. We still need to move from what's on the drawing board to practically getting it happening in the field. But we've got so much more we can learn from elsewhere in the world, from those on the forefront of the climate emergency, and so much more to share as well. We just have to get on and deliver in partnership, in collaboration, and make sure we're sharing our knowledge as widely as possible as we show that it is working and the proof of concept is there.
I think the only thing I would add to that is just in terms of our own policy making and practice closer to home here. I think we're going to have to shift very considerably in how we really embed adaptation right across government. So adaptation shouldn't just be an agenda for the Environment Department. So we've got planning policy reform. There's a huge opportunity there to really embed adaptation. We've got really good plans like shoreline management plans, yet they're not statutory. They don't have any weight in spatial planning. Yet they're providing really clear evidence and warnings about how not to develop places. So that's just one example of where we need all departments across government to be playing their part in thinking about adaptation rather than it being something that's viewed as a sort of siloed issue just for the Environment Department.
Nobody in this room likes a silo, do they? Everybody hates them. So on that note, I think we'll draw it to a close. Thank you ever so much, Emma and Julie.
Okay, so it's lunchtime, and that always means there's a few people around, so I'm going to just go and interrupt a few conversations, and that's the joy of having a microphone. It's a little bit easier to do that, and just see what people are thinking about the conference, what they've enjoyed, and just get a bit of a temperature check, really. So here we go. So I'm here with Hannah and Holly, two delegates at the conference. How are you both finding it?
I'm finding it really good. I think the atmosphere is great. There's a lot of people around. Everyone looks like they're very engaged, and we've had some great questions, haven't we, on the stand? Yeah.
What kind of great questions have you had on the stand?
Well, a lot of people are interested in net zero, so they're interested in our programme and how we aim to reach net zero by 2030.
Yesterday we went to the Women in FCRM event, and that was just great to see so many other women there, and it was just a really nice atmosphere. And
I hear it was standing room only, actually.
Yeah, it was absolutely packed, so yeah, really, really great to see so many women here.
So we've just wandered past your stand, and what I'm seeing is what looks like two sort of super squirters and a lot of Lego people, and as a mum of a 5-year-old, I'm always interested in both of these things.
So this is a wire wall system, and it measures wave overtopping.
Andy has got a very beautiful blue and pink super soaker, and he's basically knocking over small Lego people.
Hey, I did it all. I got them all.
Full house.
So the water was hitting the Lego figures, but it was also going through our vertical wires, which are a mesh of capacitance wires, and they were measuring the individual waves. We know the length of the wire that was wet by the spray, the wave spray that's going over a seawall if you're out in the field. We know the spacing of the wires when they were hit, so from that we can measure the speed of the waves and also the volume of the waves passing over a seawall. That's what our flood forecasters use to validate their forecasting tools.
I'm here with Nigel and Will and Chris. What have you thought so far? So, Chris, anything you particularly enjoyed?
Well, I enjoyed Emma Howard-Boyd's presentation, and I agree with everything that she said in terms of the concentration on nature-based schemes for flood protection.
I love being at Flood and Coast. I'm a stalwart. I've been coming for 25 years. It's a relatively small community, and whilst these are massive global issues we're talking about, the people who are actually addressing them in this country are quite a small community, and it's really important we nurture that. So events like this are critical.
I think it's that connection between what you hear at the strategic level, and of course it's great again to get to talk to people in person about how those projects are going, and you can pick up links with other people and bring it all together.
Everything is connected, as somebody once said, Nigel. Absolutely. No, it's excellent. It's been brilliant to talk to you all. I'm really pleased that you're enjoying it, and thank you so much for joining us on this special of Planet Possible. Our season sponsors for Planet Possible are Binnies, who recognise the opportunity that bringing together a breadth of professions creates to be truly amazing. Their engineers, scientists, constructors and environmental professionals collaborate to drive innovation, and Binnies, like Simon, believe that podcasts are a fantastic way to showcase some of the role models, global best practice and innovation that we have across the water and environment sector. We're grateful to Binnies for their support as it enables us to bring Planet Possible to you this season.
We're talking to Jyoti Banerjee. Welcome, Jyoti. You're the co-founder from North Star Transition, an organisation that you set up to start unpicking some of the degenerative aspects of our social and economic systems. Flooding is a really systemic thing, isn't it? It's part of the water cycle with a human cycle overlaid on that. You say that your approach to cracking these kind of systemic issues is to connect the disconnected participants in the system.
For me, North Star Transition was all about challenging the fact that we have got these multiple crises that are hitting us, whether it's a climate crisis or a biodiversity crisis or a social inequalities crisis. And all these crises affect different people in different ways. And so often, our solution is to pick one crisis and work out the best engineering solution or financial solution or whatever solution to that particular crisis, regardless of the impacts and the cost to anybody else. And so you end up in a situation where people who are involved in the crisis just because they're part of the system that's creating that crisis can feel completely disconnected from it. So, for example, we have a Wales transition lab where we're working in Wales, and we've brought together about 40 different organizations that collaborate with each other to explore the question, how would we reconnect food, health, and nature in Wales? And it's astonishing, but these are quite disconnected issues. So we've got a representative from the National Health Service in the discussion in Wales. They spend 500 million a year on diabetes, and they don't engage with anybody on food, except if it comes to obesity. So I'd say they're an example of a disconnected participant in the system.
Right, so it's all about conversations, two-way conversations.
That's kind of the start of it. So if you think of a transition lab, we first need to identify who are the participants in the system, especially the ones who might feel that they're not involved at all. And once you've got to the point where you hear them, have you actually progressed to being able to empathize with the situation that they have? Because let's say I want you to change your behavior because I don't like it. But maybe you can't change your behavior because you're caught in a system that's preventing you from doing it. So I see farmers and environmentalists battling each other. And the usual accusation is these farmers are totally ruining the land, and they're ruining the landscape for our birds and wildlife and biodiversity, which is all completely true. But the system that farmers are stuck in forced them to act in those ways. So now, can I empathize in your position that actually you're stuck doing something that perhaps you might actually want to change yourself, but you can't change it? When we've got to that position of empathy, we can then ask another question, which is, so what would actually work as a way that would make sense for you and for me? And that requires us to collaborate together, to imagine together. And once we've imagined it, we then say, now how can we engineer that and bring it to reality? So there are quite a few parts to how a transition lab works. And what I would definitely say is it's not a talk shop. It's about how we get people to get to a place where they can actually collaborate and do real things together.
I know that flooding is very complex. How do you go about distilling all of that complexity into some key action?
So we want to see the water in Wales to be healthy for future generations. Now, flooding is part of the picture as to whether you can have healthy air, soil, and water. And if that's the ambition we've set, we've got to ask ourselves the question, how would we deliver that? So in one of the areas that we're working, which is in the Y and Usk catchment areas, the Highways Agency is spending about $1.5 million on some flood defences. The railways are spending about $1 million on their flood defences in the same place, and the council's spending about $500,000. Now, if we got the farmers and the landowners and the other participants to collaborate together, it may cost us about £1 million to drive a nature-based solution through this mechanism. So way cheaper than the $3.5 million that these others are putting in. And all they're doing is building a bigger wall. Whereas the nature-based solution is about how do you change the rate of flow of water and therefore change the flooding risk or opportunity to do something different. So it's a question that comes up all the time. And I can understand why the Highways Agency may just want to build a wall because they don't want to get into the hassle of trying to work out whether there's a nature-based solution that will work, and are they going to depend on the farmer to actually carry out the action that's needed? Whereas if they got somebody to build the wall and the wall fell down, they could say, hey, you didn't do the right job, and they can claim against the insurance. So it's how we've constructed our system. We don't want to get into doing the difficult things. So instead, the easy thing is to build a wall.
Just to finish off, so you've been working in Wales.
Yes.
And now you're looking at Scotland.
Yes.
What are you going to be doing in Scotland?
So we're exploring a similar challenge in Scotland. We just like we have the Wales Transition Lab bringing people from multiple corners of the system together, we're now constructing the Scotland Transition Lab, which is focused primarily because our main partner in the project is the University of Glasgow, and they've got a global soil health program. We're looking particularly at soil health. But we don't want to be stuck in soil health, because you could so easily then just obsess with soil health and forget that actually there's a health and well-being issue that needs to be managed because of the soil health problem, etc. So we want to do a transition lab like we always do it. So we will continue working with our partners, UCL's Climate Action Unit, and we'll be bringing people together, getting them to empathize together, and then configure a Scotland that could really be regenerative as opposed to degenerative.
Sounds fantastic. Jyoti, thanks ever so much for your time. It's been great.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
Here we are, end of day 2. I'm in front of Al Chisholm and Hannah Coogan. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Lovely to have you here for our post-match analysis. I am feeling pretty tired. I don't know about you guys. It's in a good way, but it's pretty exhausting, like seeing people in person, isn't it?
I feel like an overstimulated child. In a minute, I'm going to lie down on the floor, wave my arms and feet in the air and have a tantrum. There's neon lights everywhere. I have barely seen daylight in the past 48 hours. And there's just so much going on. And just the whole range of conversations that have been going on. I haven't learnt this much in ages either, I don't think. What I really don't have is climate anxiety. People have been talking a lot about solutions in the sessions, which is great. And I think they've also been really frank about the fact that they don't have all the answers right now, but they know where we need to start moving to. And almost there's a real strong ambition that people are going to take the steps in the right direction, and we're just going to work it out as we go, because we know we've got the skills.
I mean, there's obviously an energy in the room. Do you feel like there's an energy to get stuff done? So we heard Emma Howard-Boyd this morning talking about, this is the decade of delivery. This is the decade where we have to move into action. And are you hearing those kind of ideas, both of you, that you've seen, both in terms of the exhibition and the talks, getting into that space of what does this mean in practice? How are we going to get stuff done?
I think so. I think the session I went to after lunch was good because it was showing how people were trying to do things differently, to innovate digitally, to innovate in terms of net zero carbon, and actually you've got to be brave. A lot of those things aren't tried and tested. You've got to make a start at it, because the longer we delay making a start at it, the more of a climate emergency we find ourselves in. So it's been quite refreshing about people talking about that, and people saying actually it's okay for some of these things to fail, because as long as we learn the lessons of that, then it's still been a success in terms of a learning opportunity.
Yeah, I was really reassured by hearing that, and I hope that plays out, because actually if we are going to innovate, we do need to fail. It's got to be okay to fail. It's got to be safe, hasn't it? So it's a really good point. So Al, has anything other than the overstimulation, has anything surprised you today that you've heard?
One thing that really stood out, so we were just in the last session with some of the international examples, and Dr. Tom Bridges from the US Army Corps of Engineers, he said that since 1980 there have been 300 $1 billion plus weather or climate events in the United States. Wow. I mean, in many ways that doesn't surprise me, but at the same time, it's just a mind-boggling number. On a certain level, we're missing something. We're just not getting the trigger that makes us go, right, okay, let's take those steps. Let's be brave. Let's not be scared to fail. One of the other things that I think has been brilliant that's really come out is, and Nicholas Howden, our president, summed it up beautifully at the end, and he said that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we were talking to stakeholders, talking to partners, and actually now we're talking about listening. And that just comes back to that whole not being scared to fail, having safe spaces to try stuff, to learn from everybody else's experience and work it out and co-create.
I said earlier on, I think partnership might be the new sustainability. That's my worry, that we've used the word so much. I hope it's still really meaningful, but I think it is.
I think it's meaningful as long as we are talking about everybody working in partnership with each other on their own terms, and not, I think traditionally the flood and coastal industry, and myself included, have probably been guilty at times of going into a situation saying, we want to do a flood alleviation scheme, we want to do a coastal scheme, and we want your opinion on that.
Sure.
And actually, we can only have one version of what the future looks like for a certain place. So I think that everyone, to work in a true partnership, needs to get together, and everybody needs to say, well, what would you like to do in this area? What would you like to do in this area? And what would you like to do in this area? And then you come up with shared objectives, and it feels like a team working together.
Yeah, again, Nicholas said the people coming through graduate schemes now are going to be ending their careers in about 2060, at the point where all of this stuff is really going to be biting. And that's a really sobering thought for those people, but equally I think it's a really, really motivating point for trying to encourage people to come into this sector and this area of work and profession. So
no, I think that's a really great point to finish on, really. I couldn't agree more. I feel like we've got a real responsibility, haven't we, to make sure that the legacy we leave is a really good one. Brilliant. Well, Hannah, Al, thank you so much for joining me on this.
Thank you.
No, lovely to see you.
I'm off to have a tantrum now.
Well, that's it for day 2 of our Flood and Coast Daily podcast. I hope you've enjoyed these audio specials. They've given you a bit of a flavour for what Flood and Coast is all about. We are back with our regular Planet Possible episode 3 really soon. We've got Nicholas Howden, who's the president of SIWEM, and Megan Barnes, who's one of our early career professionals, talking about really the future of the profession. So check out your podcast player for our next episode. And thanks so much for listening. That's it for now. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.